Thank you for joining us. It's the first panel of the morning. I realize that it's almost time to go line up for barbecue, so we're all honored that you've prioritized us over smoked meat today, so thank you very much for that. There's still plenty of time to run for the barbecue if you want to. So we're going to be having a conversation about the current state of the enterprise wearable software market and the challenges of deploying business-ready wearables applications. So as Rika mentioned, my name is Graham Cunliffe. I'm an SVP and partner at Food Studios. We're a professional services company, and we build custom solutions that address high-value core business challenges for our clients in a number of industries, including retail, oil and gas, pharmaceuticals, and mining. I'll stop the company plug there. Before I have the panelists introduce themselves, I'm going to give you a brief overview of how the panel is going to run. So it's going to be a free-flowing discussion. We've got 3 main discussion topics. After each of those, we'll pause and give the audience an opportunity to ask questions, so you don't have to save them all up for the end. So hopefully you appreciate that. It's also worth mentioning that the opinions that are discussed up here are those of our panelists, not necessarily the companies that they work for. So hopefully that gets you guys out of any hot water. So with that, I'd like to start with Geoff Lind and ask you to give everyone a brief introduction.
Thank you, Graham. So I'm Geoff Lind, the Senior Product Content Strategist for digital in the global marketing and brand area of Caterpillar. And I have had the privilege of serving for almost 40 years in a variety of cross-function and across industries and across continents at Caterpillar. And that's very humbling, and it reminds me of why we're all here today, which is basically to help each other serve our respective customers and help them do their jobs more safely and efficiently, productively. And that's really exciting for us to be able to share knowledge here today. So thank you to BrainXchange for making the event possible, and thank you to Graham for leading this team.
Hello, my name is Chris Grubbs, and I work at Southwest Airlines on our enterprise mobility team. Our team manages about 35,000 mobile devices. So our team is more technology-based and end-user management. So that's the history that I have with this team. We support all different operations within the airline, from maintenance to flight attendants to pilots. Rick kind of mentioned a little bit about this yesterday. Each pilot has an iPad now that has all their charts in it, so they don't have to lug around these big bags. In addition to that, point of sale is now a big point for flight attendants. So if you want a cocktail, you can get one, and we can just swipe your card really quick. So, thank you.
I'm Stephen Lewis. I work for Walmart in the international technology space now. I used to work in the source systems area where we were on the innovation team where we did a lot of RFID, IoT, and I stood up the AR space in that team where we spent almost 2 years doing augmented reality and wearable type software considerations. We did a lot of inventing, unfortunately, not a lot of off-the-shelf things to do for our use cases at that time. And that's a little bit about me.
Hi, I'm Peggy Woo, Principal Research Scientist at United Technologies Research Center. Before I introduce UTC, I wanted to note the picture as an alumni of University of Toronto. I really appreciated that picture of Steve Mann. We're certainly all here because of a lot of pioneering work in the first wave of VR and AR. So United Technologies, for those who are not familiar, is a Fortune 50 conglomerate. We own Pratt & Whitney, the jet engines, CCS, climate controls and security. You might be familiar with Kidde or Carrier. EWTS, United Technologies Aerospace, and also Otis Elevators and Escalators. So at the Research Center, we service all of those business units. We actually have been in AR and VR since the first wave in the 80s and 90s. Back then, there was a lot of internal custom hardware, and in around 2013, we started focusing more on software solutions on COTS hardware devices.
Wonderful, thank you, everyone. So the line to toe, as I mentioned, is to hold questions, but I'd like to encourage everyone off the record to interrupt, heckle, and jeer us throughout the panel. So if you got anything burning, please feel free to jump up and start shouting at us. So the first topic that we're going to get into is evaluating current solutions that are available on the software side, and really how you take a look at what's available off the shelf, what you go to third parties for, and what you develop in-house. And Stephen, I'm going to pick on you because you mentioned this already. So in the retail space, I mean, there are millions of off-the-shelf products. So how at Walmart do you assess those and figure out if you need to build something in-house, work with a third party, or buy an off-the-shelf solution?
Can I just say it's complicated and you'll be good?
Can you elaborate, please?
Okay, I'll have to elaborate. So Walmart, we're a very large company. We do a lot of different things. In the space that I've been dealing with and what I know of, we do evaluate off the shelf. We do build in-house, which we traditionally did a lot of because Walmart did scaling, quite large scaling in the earlier days, and a lot of off-the-shelf software didn't do that and didn't work at Walmart. But that's a lot better these days. And then third party, we have a lot of third party as well. So we do all three different types, but how I would say we evaluate it, it really depends on each product and area and team. And basically, if they have a roadmap, what their technology stacks already are, what gaps there are. So I would say for a lot of new companies, they're a lot more open to getting in with when there's gaps in functionality. So off the shelf is typically something we definitely try to consider first before we try to build internally. And internally and contractor, we kind of mix together. We typically do it all together. Whether it's badged associates or contractors or a mix. But the evaluation, again, is typically more on what functionality does it provide, what gaps does it fill, the budget, of course, and those sort of things.
Cool. And I think it's worth noting, when we were chatting last night, you mentioned the size of the engineering team you have, which is pretty impressive. So if you guys do decide to build something internally, you've definitely got the firepower to do
Oh,
it.
yes.
Yeah,
We
so
have
one of the biggest tech
IT.
employers.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, great. Thank you. So Chris, I'm going to turn to you now because you kind of represent the flip side of that question because you're one of the end users. And I think you have a really interesting relationship with your primary vendor. So can you tell us a little bit about how you assess potential solutions?
Yeah, thank you. So especially in that AR, VR space, we're really dependent upon our main partner, which is Boeing. So at Southwest Airlines, we only fly one aircraft type. It's a Boeing 737. So all of our maintenance and our performance is all geared around that one aircraft. And Boeing is a big partner of ours. Not only do they provide aircraft, but they also provide us maintenance expertise and manuals. And so what we're looking for with Boeing and working with them on is what is the next generation of support. So now that we've gone beyond paper and putting that onto some type of tablet, how do we then take that to the next level? You know, Boeing is really challenging the AR specifically within the assembly line area. So how do we then take that onto a maintenance perspective and then utilize that out in the field? That's really where we're dependent upon Boeing providing us really detailed and very supportable software that can work on different platforms.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And Geoff, at a manufacturing company, I imagine there are a lot of internal design processes that you follow and a lot of tools that you use. So I'm hoping you can talk to us a little bit about how that complicates the process of trying to pick a solution to use.
And adds too.
Yeah.
So when you think about the depth and breadth and reach of Caterpillar's product line, that really means we have to partner with ERP, product lifecycle management systems, obviously CAD suppliers, and all of this ideally would be a frictionless workflow. So when I think of the back end, it really is long-term, deep partnerships with great vendors that are willing to share in the pain of the problems that we experience from day to day, and really a passion for understanding our business, our dealers, our customers. And that's where the majority of that work happens. But when we talk about innovation and emerging technologies, then our purchasing and legal processes may not serve us as well when we're trying to quickly evaluate a vendor's capabilities. But there's a lot of due diligence and deep effort that goes on to make sure, I joined the company when Ronald Reagan was taking office, so he used to love the phrase trust but verify. there's a lot of verifying and risk assessment that goes on, certainly from a mobile IT perspective, from security and legal, from other types of risk when things like global data privacy regulation come into play. So if you're one of our customers and we've got your data in our system, we want to make sure that we keep it secure and that you're aware of what we're doing with that data. So that means all of the partners that we work with have to be trusted too, because if there's no trust, there's no business. So that's why it can take so long sometimes to get these initial agreements going. And we always want to make sure that we win in the right way and that we have mutual respect with our solution providers. And it's got to be a win-win situation for both of us. So working out pricing in terms and negotiating always long-term is best, but sometimes it's short-term just to make sure that we're serving the customer's needs. And sometimes when we have to pilot, then pivot, a particular solution may just be left on the side and maybe we'll work together again some other day. So we have to be able to enter agreements quickly, but also have an exit strategy so the switching costs are low. And again, we think in terms of the back end and then also the front end experience. A simple way for me to keep my head around what you call complex was really 3 coins and each has 2 sides. You have to author and manage these web-ready 3D assets, and then you have to program and deliver the customer experience with relevant situational content. And then ideally, to make sure that that it is relevant, you're measuring and interpreting the interactions with the content. So that may involve dozens of different solutions, whether it be content management or the platforms, the cloud-based platforms for delivery. And we have to have very deep agreements for each one of those with those companies, because we do want long-term relationships. Those work out best.
Great. And Peggy, I'm just going to ask if you have anything to add to this one, because I know that you focus on mainly in-house cutting-edge development. So anything to add or anything to query the other panelists on?
Sure. So just kind of to echo the prior speaker as well, I think a fourth component that's particularly important for us is to capture tribal knowledge and to use that opportunity of, we're deploying these wearables, we're in the field where people are working. Where possible, we want to capture as much data so that we could improve our own processes, and not necessarily data that's known or written. Because a lot of our technicians, they get a feel for how they do something, or there's a lot of muscle memory or tacit knowledge. They may not even be able to articulate what it is that makes them that expert for 20, 30 years. So I think that's a fourth component that's very important for us.
Great. Okay, thank you. So good news, nobody's run for the doors yet, so I think we're doing okay. Does anyone have any questions at this point that they'd like to ask of the panelists? So if you do, just stand up. Yeah, we've got a couple down here. So there's somebody with a mic working their way over to you.
Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Jeff Knight, again, Lockheed Martin. Great discussion. We really were looking forward to the software considerations. And one of the things I heard, I think it was from Steve, but this goes to the panel. What are the gaps that you find working with IP for your company as well as the others when you integrate your COTS software with something that you want to build to ensure you have scalability for your end item users?
Does anyone want to jump on that one?
Sure. So are you talking specifically about the IP or how we would work together to fill those gaps?
Well, I think those are both good comments, good questions to answer, because as an integrator or as a developer yourself, some of you guys said you do your own content creation and your own software applications, but then you can leverage certain small businesses, or not necessarily small businesses, but other businesses that you take care of in filling your gaps. And then, of course, a follow-on question is, what are some of the gaps you're finding? So there you go.
So what was that, 3 questions now?
So
Choose to answer any of them.
Yeah, so one of the challenges that we constantly face is just stovepiping. And I don't have a good solution, and especially I think when it's a very large company where, we have our digital assets in one place from one vendor, and then we have to enter stuff in SAP, and our workload is elsewhere, our workflows are elsewhere. Sometimes it's hard to get an external vendor to do all that integration work because then they have to learn every single piece. Some of the prior speakers had mentioned, we're looking at wearables as like multiple systems because you can't buy one thing that will address all of your needs. So some kind of overall ecosystem that might make that smoother. That's certainly a gap that we have identified.
And I'll answer the IP working with the vendors. So typically, we have the agreements where if we're having to build something new together, we would share the IP. Of course, the lawyers love to say you have to document everything. And, I've gone through that quite a bit with the patent stuff. But we would build it together. As far as like tech stacks, things like that, it's usually not too big of a deal. But for filling the gaps are typically either going to be on the business side or the tech side. And again, I'm more on the tech side. But from the business side, of course, there's going to be always functional gaps, and we'll look for software solutions out there. And if nothing like that exists or fits really well or requires a lot of customization, of course, we would build in-house. And in-house again could be with contractors or a mixture of things. But on the IT side, we do look at it a lot internally. We got a large IT organization all over the world, basically.
Great. Anything to add, guys?
Yeah, so from the standpoint of working with IT, everything I do related to innovation is filled with uncertainty. So we couldn't make a move without our enterprise architects and the people that have had years of experience with security and working with vendors and mobile standards and Caterpillar's way of doing business to protect our dealer and customer data. So we really rely on them. Having said that, because it is emerging technology, there are significant skill gaps on both sides. So the other thing is that you refer to them as stovepipes. Caterpillar believes innovation happens closer to the customer. So all of the business units across the breadth and depth of that product line make their own decisions. They provide the budgets for this innovation. And so sometimes they're less willing to put up with the due diligence that's needed, and they just want fast return on their investment. So it's really about stakeholder management to get everybody on the same page and understanding the challenge, and all of us put on our customer hats and make it clear why these processes are necessary, and then work together on where we get the skills, whether it be an agency of record in marketing automation or marketing campaigns, and try and pull the rope in the same direction and realize we're on the same team. But there are significant gaps that are caused depending on how much standard work there is, and it's always a challenge folding innovation into operations. Is it standard work? And then how much integration is needed if you have APIs for pulling structured content in local language, because these always have to be global deployments. So you have to do that efficiently with the data, and that's where the IT experience helps out a lot.
Great. Okay, thank you. I think we'll take one more question, so we've got another one at the same table. You aren't from Lockheed Martin as well, are you?
Yes, I am Kurt Schuringer from Lockheed Martin. I'm actually a software engineer lead on our wearables and visualization. And Peggy, you mentioned, you have a lot of SAP integration, so that's why, a lot of the vendors that are currently out there don't have the full solution for you. One of the biggest gaps that we have found is that most vendors want to be the entire solution. And they'll make small changes, but to have giant changes like you're talking about to be able to manage to your business doesn't exist. One of the integration efforts that we have found is we can't just take several vendors and stick their products together, even though we like different features from each one. Do you find that that's a problem where you have to develop entirely the software by yourself because a lot of these vendors don't allow you to just take a piece of their software and integrate it into your solution?
So the best answer is it depends. It varies based on each scenario. There's a number of factors that kind of go into play as to how we design on each. Because I'm at the research center, we really try to focus on the next generation technologies as opposed to some of the issues that maybe the IT department or some others would focus on. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the first question was a very good segue into the next topic that we're going to discuss, which is key challenges for building custom applications. So for these, I'm hoping we can sort of intertwine some use cases or project experience that you guys have in the past. And for this one, we're going to start with Peggy. So leading up to the panel, we had a few discussions, and you told me about some of the cutting edge work you're doing, and the one that really stuck in my mind was travel to and on the surface of Mars. So I think it's safe to say for a project like that there's basically nothing available on the market, and that everything you're doing is custom. So what are the key challenges you see with respect to software development for a project like that?
So if you think about a mission to Mars, the astronauts are training for 3 to 5 years beforehand. The mission is 2.5 to 3 years long. Actually, if you think about the training, it's kind of like all of us having to know each component of the car, down to the latest details, and also the physics behind it, right? So there's just a lot of training. When they're on the ground, there's no reason why we couldn't use commercial, standard tools to provide that AR or VR training. So wherever it makes sense, we would want to incorporate, because we also want to keep the cost low. It's expensive enough to do the rest of the project. In terms of field operations, whether they're on the vehicle or on the surface, United Technologies Aerospace makes the spacesuit. We make E-Class environmental controls and life support. So those are certainly unique systems, and we would have to create customizations for that. I think the most challenging is really the user experience, because they're really truly isolated, right? There's no real-time remote help during those times when there's a time delay when they're far enough away. There's no, and nobody's going to come knocking on the hatch. You have to consider redundancy. So if there are any injuries, the UX side of it, you have to have multimodal interactions, not just visual, but audio, maybe tactile. So those are, we're really focused on that end user, really user-centered design.
Great, thank you. And Geoff, I'm going to turn to you next and just play out a scenario for you here. So this is very self-serving for me as somebody who runs a professional services company. But let's say you've got a very specific problem that you're looking to solve, and you've decided that there's nothing available on the market. Are there any common challenges you see between working with internal and external parties to develop those types of solutions?
Sure. So we do easy things, incrementally, working toward, if everyone knows what a BHAG is, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And the goal that we would both work toward would be to enable customers for any of the products that we talked about to configure, explore, operate, and review maintenance and repair procedures online in 3D on any device. Can you do that?
Sure.
Sure. So when we think about common problems, whether it's an external solution provider or our internal team, it's going to be the same problems in those three coin areas that I talked about. When we go to author assets and we derive them from the engineering CAD geometry, in order to make them web ready, you have to go from millions of polygons or triangles and manually use art in 3D Studio to reduce those polygons. And any manufacturers who've worked on any of the devices already knows that is more of an art than a science. Therefore, it's time consuming, and it really slows down the process. So you end up in prototype mode just handling that. So let's say you accomplish that and you built an entire tractor that was web ready under 100,000 polygons, and I'm really proud of you for doing that. Now how are we going to keep that updated with, over the product line, maybe 250,000 engineering changes every year? That becomes a little harder. So that's a common challenge, whether it's internal or external. But part of the answer is using your product lifecycle management system to align the web-ready asset and with the source file back with the CAD, and using decades-long knowledge base and subject matter experts in the company and at our solution providers, and doing standard work and defining these procedures to do that. And by the way, this is all aspirational. We haven't pulled this off yet, but we are definitely working with a number of suppliers, including our long-term suppliers for product lifecycle management with Siemens, to do that. And we're open to PTC and Autodesk and the others to help every manufacturer in this room help do this. We always look back to those vendors first. Now, you'd probably be more, and when we think of the three coins, in terms of how do you program and deliver that experience. So you might inform me of a cloud-based platform that's worked well for your other clients that I'd want to evaluate and then work out our enterprise agreements for that cloud platform. Or maybe you'd spin something up in Unity, which our own internal team does a lot for prototyping, just so you can get with the customer and agree that the solution we think are providing is actually helping them. Because with all humility, like doctors, our job is to first do no harm, right? So put this gadget on your head and, click here and do this and do that. If you don't have the voice command so that it's natural, it's not going to be helping. So that's another example of, from a user interface standpoint, whether you're a third-party vendor or our internal folks, where we have similar challenges, is how do we do design thinking and lean innovation and work as one together?
Okay, great, thank you. And Chris, at Southwest Airlines, a lot of what you're using is off the shelf. So when you're actually going and deploying a solution, is there a certain level of customization that needs to happen in order for it to fit in with your workflows within the company?
It depends on the situation. As we get into these newer technologies, we're really looking at taking smaller bites, if you will, and solving simple problems and rolling it out and iterating against it, instead of having these big monolithic projects that take multiple years, and then you get something out that then the end users give a lot of feedback and you have to take another long period of time to adjust, right? So we're really trying to focus it and work with our partners to develop small pieces and deliver continuously, versus having to work for a period of months and then deliver something and it either kind of meet the objective, but then have all these gaps. And we talked about functionality gaps earlier, and we really want to try to avoid that and have that as part of our roadmap. So instead of it just being, we'll try this and see how it goes, we actually are trying this in this roadmap concept to where it's all going to fit together at the end, but we got to deliver incrementally so that we can constantly get feedback from the end users and tweak it as we go. And the other part of that is really important that sometimes we forget about is ongoing support thereafter, right? Is you might have one team that's continually working on development, but then you also need to support what's already in production or out in the field. And so you really have to wear both hats and keep both teams coordinated and working together to make sure that you're not only continuously delivering, but also maintaining what you've already delivered. So it's a true balancing act.
Great. And Stephen, so we've already touched on the need to develop a lot of stuff internally at Walmart. So what's your process for balancing basically the risk of building something custom, working with a third party, and then the need to move really quickly to get something to market to help you? Because I know retail changes very quickly. So how do you balance sort of that risk and need to move fast?
I would say I'm gonna put guardrails around that and say let's talk about the innovation space, which I spend a lot of time on, and not the general picture of things. So fast is the name of the game. So what we did typically is we had to come up with the use cases and figure out what's the technology that would improve the customer experience, the associate experience, things like that. So as far as the risks go, is The risk being, can we get this built in time, to do it, in a reasonable budget and get the exposure needed from the associates or the customers that for like a pilot, and then the scalability problem, of course, with wearables, augmented reality right now is a big deal. And for Walmart, being scaling is the name of the game. It's very difficult for us because of how large we are. To scale anything is very costly when it requires infrastructure or hardware. So software is fairly cheap typically to scale for us. But when you're doing augmented reality, so if you're doing headsets, or we have a lot of Zebra devices, which is the Android devices, which we use. So those aren't too hard to scale out because we have them already. But the risk, of course, is even if you can prove your proof of concept or your proof of technology out, getting it out beyond to over 2 million, associates, for instance, is a very difficult thing, especially in many countries with different, customs, different languages. Different legal problems, data retention, things like that. So it can be very difficult. So typically we do focus a lot on the US market for a lot of POCs, but the international markets are basically taking upon themselves to do their own innovations, take on their own risk, as you will, to build software or to partner with other companies to just tackle very specific niche use cases that is a problem for them, but maybe not in our other markets.
Yeah. Okay, great. And you mentioned an interesting mango project. Are you able to talk about that at all?
Which project?
The mango and lettuce project.
The
Blockchain.
The blockchain stuff.
Oh, the blockchain? Oh, I'm not in that space.
Okay.
I would say what's in the news is what you have. We're doing, mangoes, and I believe we're working on lettuce next. That is interesting stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not in that space.
Okay, everyone looks too comfortable here, so I was trying to stir it up a bit, but I failed. Are there any more questions at this point that anyone would like to ask? I'm going to see if anyone else has one before we go back to you.
Raise your hand.
Seth Lawley, Solar Turbines. This is mostly for Chris, but anyone feel free to respond. You mentioned working with third-party vendors, doing small wins. I was wondering if you're worried at all painting yourself in a corner. Maybe they're able to give you one specific solution, and then you go to step 2, and they say, hey, we can't provide that, things like that.
Yeah, we try to partner with companies so that we lay out what the full roadmap is and what the intention is so that we can build to it. We augment our teams too, so it's not all the third party. We actually have employees that are working side by side in most cases so that we can leverage that and have some of that tribal knowledge we've kind of talked about so that we can maintain that. And at some point, if we need to, we can take over that. So it just depends on the situation, but we definitely are engaged in and have the bigger picture in mind, but still try to address smaller capabilities as we go out.
Any others? Yep, we've got one up here. We'll give you one more.
It's Kurt again. So Geoff, what you said earlier about the polygon counts and getting the data in really resonates with what we do here at Lockheed too. We have aircrafts that are hundreds of millions of polygons big, but one of the things that I noticed, not just with this panel, but with the conference so far is, and that's been glazed over, is what is the structure of the content that we get in? And as we all know, content is king when it comes to these wearables. And one of the biggest problems that we have is this content comes in so many different formats. In our programs, it comes in PDF documents, it comes in, the way the CAD data is structured. What processes can we start putting back on the engineers and our technical writers to make it more appropriate to put in AR and VR and wearables? I realize the content that's already been created, it's too costly to change, but what can we do from this point forward to start pushing back on our engineers to say, let's start creating content that's going to make it easier for us to go into this new future?
Everything has to change. So our entire heritage is paper first and documents first and page layout first. It's not even web first yet. We talk about it, and we're committed to having a digital first mentality for all of our content that serves customers at every touch point around the experience lifecycle. And particularly in maintenance repair procedures, there's been a long history of trying to author that content in a way that it is structured, reusable, and reconfigurable. And when we think about a 3D model of a Caterpillar tractor, I love 3D. I'm a real geek and a nerd, and I love gaming, and I played with all of this, but I have to admit, at the end of the day, a 3D model by itself is almost worthless until you start to overlay relevant data that you can pull from the different systems, whether it be for sales or service or safety and so on, which means that all of those databases have to be consumable. Lisa, who was originally going to be on this panel, I watched her YouTube, and she said, it's not about big data, it's about big knowledge, and I couldn't agree more. How do we get all the way to the knowledge stage? So I think wearables are going to help us capture the knowledge and help us collaborate far better than we've ever done before, and really think in terms of digital first. Again, I'll go back to our CAD providers and our major suppliers and put the burden on them. And I know PTC has made an enormous investment in this space and the digital twin and how to author and manage that content. And we really appreciate that. And the others need to do even more. So is Autodesk with the Forge Cloud platform. But how do we reconfigure this content? For example, we have to configure it with the price list when we're selling a tractor. So all of those web-ready, low-poly items, it's not just a tractor, it's all of the pieces of a tractor that are aligned with the items in the price list and what work tools and attachments you want to buy along with that tractor. So it really, the back end is the most important part. So even though in innovation, we're iterating through experiences and emerging devices, it's much more about the back end and a digital first commitment of how that's authored. In terms of how to get engineers to do it that way, that's where I spoke before about what is the process for establishing engineering modeling guidelines and recommending and enforcing those guidelines? And that's very difficult in a company where the individual business units and product groups have autonomy, because we don't want them to blame the ivory tower for why they didn't meet their program deadlines on spec and on cost, because they were adhering to some mandate. So it is a balance.
Go ahead.
Okay, so for us, I mean, I have the benefit of being at the research center, although it was founded in 1929, so it's a well-established organization. We understand that you have to balance, individual preferences and customization and just how they work. Even if it's going to be paper and pencil, and then you have to rescan it afterwards. We have a lot of those same issues. Our approach is, we really want that flexibility, and what we need is a layer of AI, a layer of something on top of it. So we've been exploring the ideas of human-machine symbiosis. What are the humans good at, and what are the machines good at, and how can we use the machines to kind of complement our skills?
And one thing I'd like to add is, software engineer in me wants to kind of yell out, hey, don't forget, you need to tailor it for what the unit is. So for a headset, for instance, you want it, having high polygons is going to be very helpful. And you don't want a lot of text in that versus, you need to tailor experience for a phone, which is still small, but you have your hands full, or a tablet, which you can see a whole lot of data. So you definitely need to scale your content, even for watches, for instance, really tiny to be for the use case. And then at the same time, knowing it's a mobile experience and you don't want to do a lot of processing or at least too much processing on the mobile to drain your battery. So you do want to have a pretty powerful backend that's intelligent enough to feed each device at that moment and ensure that it can still work, especially when you have very low connectivity or almost no connectivity. You have to be able to have pretty smart caching mechanisms for knowing what kind of job you're doing. Right.
Okay, thank you. And
Could I just add a quick point to that? I remember the days when, for all the different form factors, we were storing images at different resolutions based on the screen size. And then a product like Scene 7 came along that did that on the fly. In the content management system, you store one high-res image, it figures out the screen, and it rescales in the moment. So when solutions like that come along, they can really solve some serious problems, because just the complexity as all of this grows, and you mentioned AI, I think that's going to be a big part of the solution.
Thank you. So I'd like to say that I haven't paid the Lockheed guys to set up all of our discussion topics, but it's worked out really well, so thank you. So the final topic we're going to discuss are software-related issues that are preventing wearable technology from reaching its full potential and ultimately being rolled out in enterprise. So for this one, Chris, I'd like to start with you. You mentioned that Southwest is not currently managing any wearable deployments, but you are doing some trials. So what are you seeing that's actually stopping those trials from moving into full-blown solutions that are scaled across the company?
We're having really challenges with our end user engagement. And what I mean by that is we are a heavily unionized business. So any solution that we bring forward for our operational users who are all unionized, we have to partner with them, and not just the end user, but the union that they belong to. So it's not a technology challenge per se, it's a people and a organizational challenge that we have to deal with. And so it requires a lot of collaboration from the very beginning and transparency. So the secret to, I hope it's not a secret, but the real secret to working with those organizations is having often open communication and to never feel like we're trying to hide anything from anybody. And having them as part of the engagement team, the stakeholders, so I think we've talked about managing stakeholders is by far the key point of rolling out technology for us, is we have to understand all the different stakeholders that need to be engaged, from security, from our cloud engineering teams to our individual stakeholders, the end users and the organizations that they belong to have to be part of the solution. And we can't design solutions without them, because once we design them, it may not get used. And that's a big waste for everybody. So we found that it always works better to have them engaged up front. And to that, we're really working on things that we can find value in. So being safety first, the objectives to having something obstruct your vision is a challenge we're still working through and waiting for iterations of the AR capabilities to see what can work for us in that space. In addition to that, then you have body wearables that are really practical in a lot of use cases. So that's really where we're spending our time working with our innovation team on developing those practical, easy solutions. And again, having a bigger picture in mind, but then iterating in small pieces and getting things rolled out and testing it in areas, again, with union support to that, so that they can then be a part of the decision to, we want to proceed and distribute this out to everybody.
Great, thank you. And Peggy, I'm going to come back to you here. So with a lot of your work being very future-looking, and knowing that a lot of the technology doesn't exist today that's going to deliver it, what software-related issues are you seeing that you think are really hampering the effectiveness of your work?
I think we touched on a couple of those. The kind of more real-time is, decimating large models and optimizing them. There's some automated tools out there, but you still have to spend a lot of time fussing around with the models. Stovepiping, we had talked about that. I think the issue that multiple speakers have brought up before, it's great to hear about anecdotes of, AR is improving my productivity, it's improving my performance, but there's really a hole in the literature in the kind of academic world. In terms of, we need more transparency on how are you conducting those studies, what are your methods, so that, where it's generalizable, we could learn more and grow as a community. Again, great start to start measuring them, but let's go the next step and then do peer-reviewed, publications and things like that. So I think some of the fundamentals, a lot of the fundamental work has been addressed in the first wave of AR and VR. We could certainly learn a lot from that, but there's still a lot of fundamental, especially safety related things that we could learn from and grow as a community.
Great. Okay, thank you. So Stephen and Geoff, we've got time for me to ask one of you a question. So would you guys like to fight for it? And when the winner emerges, I'll tell you whether you get to answer a question or
arm
avoid
wrestle.
Choose a number between 1 and 10.
Pick a number. Okay, Geoff, I think I'm going to go back to you here on this one. Sorry, Stephen.
That's fine.
So given that a lot of what you focus on really is content creation right now, you've mentioned a couple of partners that you work with. Are there any other sort of software challenges you're seeing that's preventing some of your work from being rolled out?
Absolutely. It doesn't do everything. And that's very, it just irritates me. So if I have a cloud platform that can deliver 3D through web browsers, including mobile browsers, so it's responsive design, I want to be able to just drop my phone into a headset and have it be stereoscopic virtual reality. I don't want to go to another vendor and another platform and start all over for that experience. And of course, I want the skid steer loader to be in full scale out on the parking lot, so I want it to do augmented reality and mixed reality so I can use voice commands. But as Gartner tells us, forget about it. There is not one solution provider that can go soup to nuts from the back end to the front end to deliver the experience. So that is my largest software problem. And the second, I love what you said about transparency. If you want to be a solution provider, we want to become partners. And we're very open, and we will share with you, as I have every one of the CAD suppliers, the polygon reduction challenge and where all of our pain points. And then we work together as partners to try and get through that. But if you're interested in making a quick sale and for us just to buy a 3-year subscription to your solution, forget it. It's not going to end fast and you're not going to enjoy it, right? We have a due process. So it's really a commitment to the partnership with the software solution providers. And I also have to remind myself to be patient and expect these other emerging capabilities to eventually come, because I'm not allowed to ask them forward-looking statements and things like that, right? So I'll be good.
Great. Okay, so we've got time for one more question from the audience. So do we have one? No? Okay, I think we'll wrap then. So please join me in thank youing our panelists.